The sky has always been a source of wonder and terror for humanity since the dawn of time. When we look up into the endless blue expanse, we often imagine angels, or perhaps extraterrestrial visitors, watching us from above. However, there is a much older and far more primal fear that haunts the collective memory of the North American continent. It is the shadow that blocks out the sun and the sound of wings that clap like thunder rolling across the plains. This implies the existence of predators so large they defy the laws of physics and biology. Yet they appear in the oral histories of indigenous tribes and the terrified reports of modern citizens alike. These are the Thunderbirds, the lords of the upper air, indigenous people across North America have spoken of these massive avian creatures for thousands of years before European settlers arrived on the shores. To the tribes of the Pacific Northwest and the Great Plains, the Thunderbird was a powerful spirit being that controlled the weather and shot lightning from its eyes. Yet alongside the spiritual reverence, there was a very real fear of physical creatures that inhabited the high peaks and remote canyons. The Illiniwek people along the Mississippi River told early French explorers about the Piasa Bird, which was a winged monster that had a taste for human flesh. These were not merely metaphorical stories meant to explain storms, but warnings about a tangible danger that hunted men from the sky. The stories of these winged monstrosities did not vanish as civilization marched westward across the continent in the 19th century. Instead, the encounters became more detailed and were often recorded in the newspapers of the era, alongside reports of cattle rustling and mining disasters. One of the most infamous accounts comes from the harsh and unforgiving deserts of Arizona Territory in the year 1890. It was a time when men carried iron on their hips, and death waited behind every cactus and boulder. Two cowboys were riding their horses through the Dragoon Mountains when they spotted something that looked like a prehistoric nightmare rising from the dusty earth. The creature described by these hardened frontiersmen was unlike anything known to modern science or zoology. They claimed it resembled a massive alligator with an elongated tail and an immense pair of bat-like wings. The wingspan was said to be enormous, stretching over 160 feet from tip to tip. The cowboys raised their rifles and fired at the beast, eventually bringing the titan crashing down to the desert floor. This account was published in the Tombstone epitaph newspaper, creating a legend that has persisted for over a century. Many people claim a photograph was taken of the dead creature pinned to a barn, but the image has mysteriously vanished from history. While the story of the Tombstone Thunderbird is often dismissed as a tall tale from the Wild West, the sightings did not stop there. As the decades passed and the world moved into the 20th century, the reports of giant birds, migrated from the desolate deserts to the populated heartland of America. In the late 1940s, a wave of hysteria gripped the state of Illinois and the surrounding Midwestern region. People reported seeing birds the size of small airplanes perched on telephone wires or gliding silently over cornfields. These were not spiritual entities, but flesh and blood animals that seemed out of place in the modern world. The fear intensified because these creatures were not just observing from a distance, but were reportedly interacting with the environment in aggressive ways. Farmers claimed that livestock was vanishing from their pastures, leaving behind no trace of blood or struggle. Large dogs were snatched from backyards in the dead of night, with only a startled yelp to mark their passing. The local authorities were baffled and often ridiculed those who came forward with such outrageous claims. However, the laughter would stop abruptly when the monster decided to target something much more precious than a stray dog or a wandering calf. It was a humid evening in July of 1977 in the small town of Lawndale, Illinois. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the suburban neighborhood where the Lowe family lived. 10-year-old Marlon Lowe was playing outside in his backyard with his friends, enjoying the last moments of daylight. The air was thick and heavy, and a strange silence seemed to descend upon the street. The birds stopped singing, and the insects ceased their chirping, as if nature itself was holding its breath in anticipation of a predator. Marlon ran across the grass, unaware that he was being watched from the darkening sky above. Suddenly, two massive birds descended from the clouds with terrifying speed and precision. They were black as coal, with a ring of white feathers around their long, muscular necks. Their beaks were curved and yellow, sharp enough to tear through flesh and bone with ease. One of the birds swooped down low, while the other circled overhead like a vulture waiting for a carcass. The creature on the attack extended its talons, which were described as being the size of a human hand. Before anyone could scream or react, the bird clamped its claws onto the straps of the sleeveless shirt Marlon was wearing. The sheer power of the beast was immediately evident as it began to beat its massive wings against the air. Dust and grass were kicked up into a blinding cloud as the bird lifted the terrifying weight of the screaming boy off the ground. Marlon kicked and flailed his legs, trying desperately to find purchase on the earth that was rapidly moving away from him. His mother, Ruth Lowe, was inside the house when she heard the hysterical screams of her son and his friends. She rushed to the back door and witnessed a scene that would be etched into her nightmares for the rest of her life. Her son was dangling in the air, suspended by the grip of a prehistoric monster that looked like it had flown straight out of a history book. The bird had lifted Marlon roughly 2 feet off the ground and was carrying him toward the perimeter of the yard. Ruth screamed a primal sound of maternal rage and terror. As she sprinted across the lawn toward the beast, the other children scattered in every direction, hiding behind bushes and fences, unable to comprehend the horror unfolding before them. The bird struggled against the weight of the struggling boy and the frantic movements of his limbs. As Ruth closed the distance, the creature seemed to realize that its prey was too difficult to carry away without a fight. It released its grip, and Marlon dropped to the hard ground with a heavy thud. The boy scrambled backward on his hands and knees, his face pale and his eyes wide with shock. The giant bird let out a piercing shriek that sounded like metal grinding against metal before flapping its wings powerfully to gain altitude. It joined its companion in the sky, and the two dark shapes circled once more, as if considering a second attempt before turning toward the horizon. The aftermath of the Lawndale incident left the community in a state of shock and disbelief. The police were called, and they arrived to find a traumatized family and a boy with deep red marks on his shoulders where the talons had pressed against his skin. The shirt Marlon had been wearing was torn and shredded evidence of the physical reality of the attack. Despite the physical proof and the multiple witnesses, the story was met with skepticism by the wider public. Ornithologists insisted that no bird on Earth was capable of lifting a human child. They argued that the largest birds in North America, such as the condor or the eagle, simply did not have the bone structure or muscle mass to carry that much weight. They suggested that the boy had been attacked by a normal turkey vulture, and that fear had exaggerated the size of the animal in the minds of the witnesses. However, those who were there knew what they saw. They knew the span of the wings blocked out the twilight sky, and they felt the wind generated by the massive strokes of the feathers. This was no vulture. The ridicule that the Lowe family faced was almost as traumatic as the attack itself. They were mocked in the press and accused of fabricating the story for attention. Dead birds were left on their porch by cruel pranksters, and their phone rang at all hours of the night with harassing calls. The psychological toll forced them to retreat from the public eye, but they never recanted their story. Marlon Lowe grew up carrying the memory of the talons digging into his shoulders and the view of his backyard shrinking beneath his feet. As the years went by, other reports surfaced that seemed to corroborate the existence of these giant avian predators. In Alaska and Pennsylvania, credible witnesses, including pilots and police officers, reported seeing birds with wingspans rivaling small aircraft. In 2002, a sighting in Alaska described a bird that looked like a massive eagle with a wingspan of 14 feet, which is twice the size of a bald eagle. The locals recalled the legends of their ancestors and wondered if the ancient creatures were waking up from a long hibernation. Cryptozoologists and researchers have proposed several theories to explain these impossible sightings. Some believe that the Thunderbirds are a surviving population of teratorns, which were giant Pleistocene birds that were thought to have gone extinct 10,000 years ago. These prehistoric giants had wingspans of up to 25 feet and were certainly capable of hunting large prey if a small population managed to survive in the remote and unexplored wilderness of North America. It would explain the consistent descriptions of their size and appearance. Another theory suggests that the Thunderbirds are not flesh and blood animals at all, but rather supernatural entities that manifest in our reality. This aligns with the indigenous lore that views them as spiritual beings connected to the elemental forces of nature. In this view, they are guardians of the upper world, appearing only when the balance of nature is disturbed, or when a warning needs to be delivered to mankind. Their appearance is often associated with storms and severe, whether acting as harbingers of doom and destruction. There is also a more disturbing possibility that involves interdimensional travel. Some paranormal researchers speculate that certain locations in North America act as thin spots or portals between worlds. The Lawndale incident and the Tombstone sighting both occurred in areas known for high strangeness and unexplained phenomena. Perhaps these creatures slip through these rifts from a world where dinosaurs and megafauna never went extinct. They hunt in our world for a brief period before returning to their own, leaving behind only trauma and disbelief. The physical evidence for the Thunderbird remains elusive, much like the creature itself. Unlike Bigfoot, where researchers cast footprints or look for hair, samples, a bird leaves very little trace behind. It lands, it kills, and it flies away into the vast emptiness of the sky. The only evidence left behind is the anecdotal testimony of terrified witnesses and the occasional blurry photograph that is easily dismissed as a hoax. Yet the consistency of the reports over hundreds of years suggests a pattern that cannot be ignored. Consider the sheer number of unexplored areas in North America, particularly in the mountain ranges of the West and the dense forests of the North. It is arrogant to assume that we have cataloged every living species on this continent. New animals are discovered every year, although usually much smaller than a giant bird. However, the coelacanth was thought to be extinct for millions of years until it was found swimming in the ocean. Is it so impossible that a giant bird of prey has managed to evade capture in the vast wilderness? The skepticism of the scientific community is understandable, but it does not comfort those who have stared into the yellow eyes of the beast. For the Low family, the debate over taxonomy and biology was irrelevant. They knew that something monstrous had tried to take their son, and that it had the power to do so. The fear of the open sky is a sensation that most modern humans have lost. But for those who have encountered the Thunderbird, that primal fear returns with a vengeance. It changes the way you look at the world when you realize that humans are not always the apex predator. We build our fences and our homes believing we are safe from the wild. We lock our doors to keep out intruders on the ground, but we rarely think to look up. The Thunderbird represents a threat that comes from the one direction we cannot defend against. It strikes from the heavens with the speed of a falling star and the force of a hurricane. Even today, in the age of drones and satellites, the reports continue to trickle in. Hikers in the Appalachian Mountains report seeing massive shadows gliding over the canopy. Drivers on lonely desert highways in Nevada claim to see birds perched on cliffs that dwarf the surrounding vegetation. These stories are often shared in hushed tones on internet forums and around campfires. The witnesses are afraid of being ridiculed, but they are more afraid of keeping the truth to themselves. The legend of the Thunderbird serves as a reminder that the world is still full of mysteries and dangers that we do not fully understand. It challenges our perception of reality and forces us to confront the possibility that monsters are real, whether they are relics from the Ice Age or spirits from another dimension. They share our world, and they watch us from the clouds. The sky is their domain, and we are merely guests walking upon the earth below. Imagine walking alone in a deep valley as the sun begins to dip below the peaks. The wind picks up, and you hear a sound like a flag snapping in a gale, but much louder. You look up and see a silhouette that blocks out the dying light. It is not a plane, and it is not a cloud. It is a living, breathing creature with wings that span the width of the road. In that moment, all your logic and reason vanish, replaced by the instinct to run and hide. This is the legacy of the Thunderbird. It is the monster that connects the ancient past to the modern present. It bridges the gap between the campfire tales of the Illiniwek and the police reports of suburban Illinois. It proves that fear is a universal language spoken across centuries and cultures. The creature may have different names in different times, but the terror it inspires remains exactly the same. The photograph from Tombstone may remain lost, forever a ghost image of a ghost story, but the image of Marlon Lowe dangling above his backyard in 1977 is burned into the historical record. It stands as a testament to the fact that the impossible can and does happen. It warns us that our understanding of the natural world is incomplete, and that there are things in the dark corners of the map that are hungry. Some say the Thunderbirds have retreated further into the remote corners of the earth, driven away by the noise and pollution of modern civilization. Others believe they are simply biding their time, waiting for the right moment to return in force. They nest on the highest peaks, where no human foot has ever stepped, watching the cities expand and the forests shrink. They are the silent, observers the ancient kings of the sky. So the next time you hear a sudden clap of thunder on a clear day, or see a shadow pass over you that seems too large to be a cloud, do not dismiss it so quickly. Do not assume it is just a trick of the light or a figment of your imagination. Pause for a moment and scan the heavens. Look for the shape that does not belong the silhouette, that stirs a deep and ancient dread in your stomach, because they are still out there. They are gliding on the thermal currents high above our heads, where the air is thin and cold. They are watching us with eyes that have seen the rise and fall of civilizations, and occasionally, when the hunger takes them, or the mood strikes, they descend to remind us of our place in the food chain. The Thunderbird is not just a myth, it is a living, breathing nightmare that flies. As night falls and you retreat into the safety of your home, remember that walls can protect you from the wolf and the bear, but against the predator that falls from the sky, there is no true sanctuary. The lingering dread is not just that they exist, but that they can reach us anywhere at any time. The sky is vast, and we are small, and in the eyes of the Thunderbird, we are nothing more than prey waiting to be claimed.